Welcome to the first module in the 6-part series on challenging behavior. Throughout the 6 modules, we will talk about the principles of applied behavior analysis, how to identify the functions of challenging behavior, how to prevent challenging behavior, and the interventions that can be used to address challenging behavior. In this first module, we begin with a brief overview of applied behavior analysis, define what are behaviors, and discuss how behaviors are learned. Applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is a scientific discipline that gives us specific strategies to change behavior. We can use ABA to increase desirable behaviors like language, social interactions, and play, or to decrease challenging behavior such as tantrums. Interventions based on ABA can be helpful for anyone, including children who exhibit challenging behavior. Let's start by defining the word behavior. When we talk about behavior, we are referring to any action that we do. If you are unsure on whether a behavior is truly a behavior, you can use what the experts call the dead man test. It is safe to say that if a dead man can do it, then it is not a behavior. For example, asking a child to sit down without moving or talking will not pass the dead man test because a dead man can do this. So what behaviors are we interested in? There are 2 types of behavior, respondent and operant. Respondent, or unlearned behaviors, are those that we cannot control. For example, sweating in response to heat and blinking when our eyes dry out. While these are true behaviors according to the dead man test, they are not the behaviors that we will be focusing on because they are not within our control. Instead, we will be focusing on operant behaviors. These are behaviors that are learned by consequences. One example of an operant behavior is saying, "Mom." Every time a boy says, "Mom," his mother looks at him. So over time, the child learns that saying, "Mom," will have her look at him. Hence, saying "Mom" is an operant behavior because it is learned. Now that we have talked about what is behavior in general, let us focus on what a challenging behavior is. Depending on the culture or the context, challenging behavior may be defined differently. For example, imagine a child running around the table during mealtime. The running may be considered as challenging in some cultures, but it may also be considered age-appropriate in other cultures. Generally, challenging behaviors are persistent and resistant to change, cause harm to self or others, interfere with the child's ability to learn, and impact the family's well-being. All of these could lead to social isolation and stress of the children and their families. Let's take a closer look at some examples of challenging behavior. Here are some examples of challenging behavior. These behaviors are categorized by their characteristics. This is by no means a complete list. Yet, we will attempt to categorize a child's challenging behavior into 4 areas: physical aggression, verbal aggression, regulating emotions, and non-compliance. Physical aggression may include hitting, scratching, biting, or throwing objects. Verbal aggression includes excessive demands, making threats, using bad words, or calling other people names. Regulating emotions includes behavior like tantrums or persistent crying. Finally, non-compliance includes escaping or saying no. As mentioned before, this is not an exhaustive list. Families may have different definitions of what a challenging behavior is. What makes a behavior challenging depends on culture and context. Therefore, before we determine how to address a challenging behavior, we must first look at its characteristics and its context. We should ask, what does the challenging behavior look like? Where and when does the behavior happen? What do we think causes that behavior to happen? And why does the behavior continue to happen? By answering these questions, we can better understand the challenging behavior and determine strategies to address it. To address challenging behavior, we should learn how behavior in general increases or decreases. A consequence, which is the event that happens immediately after a behavior, will decide whether the behavior will happen again in the future. The consequences of behavior will either increase, decrease, or extinguish the behavior through the process of reinforcement, punishment, and extinction. Reinforcement is a consequence, an event that happens after the behavior, that makes the behavior more likely to repeat in the future. For example, if a dad gives his child milk every time she says milk, the dad is reinforcing the child's behavior of saying milk. The behavior of saying milk is being reinforced because her dad honors the verbal request. The child is now much more likely to say milk every time she wants milk. The second type of consequence is punishment. Unlike reinforcement, punishment decreases the chances of a behavior from happening again in the future. For example, Suri touches a candle flame and it burns her hand. In the future, Suri is much less likely to touch the fire because she learned from the experience. The burn on her hand was a punishment that decreased the behavior of touching flames. Another consequence is extinction. Extinction happens simply when the reinforcement of previously reinforced behavior stops. Imagine a scenario where you push a broken elevator button. You would probably push the button a few times before you eventually give up and take the stairs or take another elevator. In this case, your behavior of pushing the elevator button was extinguished because it was not reinforced anymore. Since now we know the behavior is learned through one of three consequences, reinforcement, punishment, or extinction, it is important to understand what the behavior is telling us. All behaviors happen for at least one reason, and we call these reasons functions of behavior. Children often effectively get what they want with challenging behavior. The consequences of these challenging behaviors can increase the chances of it happening in the future. So how do we know what children are communicating with challenging behaviors? We can do that by identifying the function or the reason of the challenging behavior, a topic which we will cover in future modules. After we identify the function or the reason, we can either prevent challenging behaviors from happening or teach the child a functional replacement for them, or reinforce other desired behaviors. One commonly used approach to identifying the function or purpose of a behavior is through collecting ABC data, which we will also explain in future modules. In a future module, we will discuss these functions of behavior, primarily attention, tangible, and escape. Today, we explain some basic concepts of behavior, ABA, and the effects of consequences on behavior change. In the following modules, we will explain these concepts with more detail and introduce different strategies to help in behavior change.